The iconic yellow taxi. It's hard to imagine New York's streets without them. But taxi drivers here were in a state of crisis at the start of 2020. Then the coronavirus pandemic hit.
Drivers were classified as essential workers, and so the industry was not shut down. But there's been no work.
I think at its height was about a 93% drop in ridership.
It was eerie to see the city like this.
I don't know how we survived like a year after the beginning of pandemic. It's just a miracle that we're still alive.
We're crawling back, but it's going to be a slow crawl in my opinion.
There are over 13,500 yellow taxis in New York City. The medallion on the hood of those cars makes them the only vehicles legally allowed to pick up people hailing a ride on the streets. When the city shut down in March of 2020 as coronavirus spread, yellow taxis were still allowed to cruise the streets, but there was no one looking for a ride. Licensed taxi drivers in New York faced their toughest challenge ever. But before we can get into where they stand now and their hopes for the future, you have to appreciate the hardship and distress they were already facing before anyone ever heard of COVID-19. I'm Steve Kastenbaum, and this is New York Gritty, a podcast about the resiliency of New Yorkers in times of crisis.
My name is Val George. I've been driving taxi for 30 years in New York City, and I've been medallion owner for almost 20 years. As many immigrants in America, I came with it for better life, and I started driving probably a month after I arrived. And I was so excited of my new life and drove like a couple of years. And then I got excited by the city luring of opportunity for everybody to buy a medallion, and that's like buying the American dream, because it's a very good investment according to them, and good retirement, and at the same time they are saying that we're buying a job, so it's security.
And a yellow medallion is what you need to own that gives you the license to operate a taxi, to own a taxi in New York, and it's basically your business. The taxi we're sitting in right now is the equivalent of your small business storefront. This is it, right?
That's right, yeah. So it was so extremely new to me. I was so excited, a small business owner, and talked to my wife, and she's like, "You crazy, borrowing so much money." But I said, what are the other options? So we sit down and talk about it, and finally we decided, okay, we'll go for it. So I bought the medallion, and so I started working. Everything looked okay. I should mention that there was statistic that for these years, before Uber and Lyft came, we are doing 500,000 trips a day. And these are 14,000 medallions that were doing incredible help to the city to move people around. You know, I had so many cases in my car. Somebody jumps, take me to the hospital. Then a pregnant lady, oh, we gotta go. It's last second, and it's like I don't know. Maybe I should write a book about all these happenings in my car. It was kind of fun, excited, but was also very difficult. I remember I've been working like for forever, for like more than 12 hours, 6-7 days sometimes a week, sleeping like sometimes I remember like 4 hours a day, because I had to take care of the kid, and it was not easy.
You got into the taxi business as a new immigrant to New York. You came from Bulgaria,
Yeah.
and at the time, New York City's iconic yellow taxis were handling 500,000 rides, customers a day.
That's correct. And things are doing well, but the city government needed money. So they're like, okay, so we're going to make this monopoly so we can sell medallion licenses to these people. They can buy it. And the prices were jumping like crazy. And at one point, the cost was $1 million.
So here you are, a new immigrant to New York. You buy into this idea that the medallion is your answer to the American dream, and you took out a loan for how much to get this medallion?
I took the first loan, $350.
And then what did the value of the medallion go up to?
Within less than 10 years, went up to 1 million.
That's incredible. That's incredible. So here you are, you have this thing that you think is worth $1 million, and you're working nonstop to pay off the loan, but it's going well. And then Uber and Lyft come along, and then what happens to your industry?
All of a sudden, as I said, the TLC sold us this dream, and we are thinking that this job is secure because this is city agency that watch over us, because we are like a small business owner, but the rules and regulation are controlled by them 100%. You can do nothing without their permission. Actually, you have to follow all the orders and regulation. You got to pay fees, and then they allowed in the beginning like 30,000 Lyft and Ubers, and all of a sudden we didn't realize what the hell is going on, and then 80,000 to 100,000 black cars that were working for the app companies.
The TLC, being the Taxi and Limousine Commission, they heavily regulated, and still do, the yellow taxi industry. But then Uber and Lyft came along. More than 100,000 drivers signed up with these companies to work.
Within years, was crazy. I'm like, what's going on? These people in this company, they come here and take our business, and without paying nothing to the city, and we had to pay hundreds of thousands. Many people pay millions of dollars for the right to work to pick up people in the New York City in the 5 boroughs.
Then what happened to you and your business, and what happened to the value of this medallion that some people paid close to $1 million for?
Everything crashed. All of a sudden, everything went down. Uber and Lyft took over.
So where did that leave drivers? How much were you making a day? Were you able to pay off the loans? We heard so many stories back then, and this is all pre-COVID pandemic.
That's right.
Drivers going bankrupt.
Yeah, everything starting to go down the drain. I used to make probably $200-300 a day easily, and then when they came, and I'm driving around and I cannot pick up anything because people, of course, they're going to use app, which is much easier to call Uber from your bedroom, and then in 5 minutes you're going down.
My name is Bedavi Desai. I am the Executive Director of the New York Taxi Workers Alliance. The Taxi Workers Alliance is a union of drivers in New York City. We have over 25,000 members. Our members drive across the industry, so yellow cab, green cab, Uber, Lyft vehicles, as well as neighborhood liveries and corporate black cars.
I want to start from before the pandemic hit New York. What was the landscape like for taxi drivers, Uber and Lyft drivers? What was going on here in New York City? We know that there were some very serious issues affecting drivers in the Big Apple.
Well, even before the pandemic, this is a workforce that's really been in an economic crisis for several years now. In 2018, the city of New York found that about 90% of Uber and Lyft drivers were earning below the minimum wage. Of course, yellow cab drivers have just been devastated as business has really plummeted. There's so many livery bases that have shut down, as well as black car companies. And many of the black car bases were actually driver co-ops. There's been a serious crisis across this industry that has left this workforce, drivers, deep in debt and earning poverty wages.
Now, this was all happening in the time period before coronavirus was a reality here, and suicide rates had risen dramatically in a very shocking way, right?
Yes, in November 2017, we received phone calls at the union that there were 2 livery drivers in the Bronx who had committed suicide. Then in February 2018, a black car driver, Douglas Shifter, shot himself outside the gates at City Hall, and he left a very damning note on Facebook, which I still think is like the most damning essay ever written about the gig economy in this country, and it happens to be a suicide note. After that, of course, the issue became very public. And by the next month, there is a yellow cab owner driver, Nicanor Ochasor, who committed suicide. And about 6 weeks later, Kenny Chow, also a yellow cab owner driver, committed suicide. And, by the end of the year, we had 9 driver suicides between November 2017 to like November 2018. What Douglas's suicide note wrote about was the fact that there had been such a saturation of vehicles on the streets that, Uber and Lyft had just flooded the streets with cars, making it absolutely impossible for drivers to get around and fairly compete for fares. Uber and Lyft drivers were stuck behind a longer line within their own companies to be dispatched, and all other drivers in the competing subsectors, were literally just being drowned.
My name is Richard Chow. So I bought the Medallion 2006 from the New York City auction. I paid $410,000 for the Medallion. I'm driving for 15 years. So I live in Staten Island.
How hard was it to pay off your loan?
Before the pandemic, we are already the business are down about 40%. We are down 40%. We cannot pay the Medallion loan. The consumers, they're taking the Uber and Lyft. They're not taking the yellow. So we down the 40% of the business. We cannot survive. We cannot pay back to the loan. So now we had a crisis. So, a lot of drivers, they fight the bankruptcy, fight the suicide. Like my brother, he bought the Medallion, $700,000 in 2009. After he cannot pay, he cannot make money, they go home to pay back the bank. And then he's committed suicide in 2018 near the Grace Mansion, the East River.
The entire city heard about your brother's story, and I'm terribly sorry for your loss, but people really didn't know how bad taxi drivers had it until that happened. He was facing crushing debt. He couldn't pay this loan that he took out for the taxi medallion, but he wasn't alone.
He wasn't alone. So, total 9 drivers committed suicide. So, now a lot of drivers, they filing the bankruptcy, the foreclosure, even a lot of people, the driver, they cannot pay back the banks, the foreclosure, the Medallion, not only even the Medallion, for, their home, they access their home. The owner driver, they lost their home, they're going to be homeless.
The economic despair that drivers have experienced, it really is across the board.
That's Bhairavi Desai again, the head of the New York Taxi Workers Alliance.
For yellow cab owner drivers, what they have seen is not only the loss of their income like everybody else, but on top of that, they're stuck in debt, paying off the medallion. They've also seen their retirements cash, because the medallion was seen as the piece of retirement for medallion owners, that there would be enough equity built into the medallion that people could sell it or they could rent it and be able to live off of it and have a reasonable retirement. All that has crashed.
So these issues had come to the surface and New Yorkers had become more aware of them in recent years. And then we started hearing about coronavirus in the beginning of 2020. The shutdown in some industries across New York was immediate. It was overnight. What happened for taxi drivers when that was taking place?
So drivers were classified as essential workers, and so the industry was not shut down. But there's been no work. The airports have been shut down. All the industries that drivers rely on for work have been shut down. The neighborhoods that they rely on for work have been practically deserted. The airlines have been at a standstill. And so the impact has just been really devastating because, I mean, there's no work out there. And so financially, you're talking about workers, right, who depend on earning a paycheck day to day, week to week. And so to go overnight to, having no money at all, I think for like a lot of Americans, including drivers, it's just been a really economically devastating time. For drivers on top of that, they're working in very closed spaces. It's a car. You're transporting strangers. We know that drivers were among the first to be affected by COVID. I mean, one of the first New Yorkers whose death was publicized was one of our members who had been an Uber driver. And so you're in that enclosed space. You had no idea that there could have been a deadly virus in your vehicle. Your passenger didn't know it, you didn't know it. And so at one point when we surveyed our members, we found that 40% said that they had either contracted COVID and were quarantined at home, or were in the hospital, or a family member or friend that they live with has had COVID.
My name is Augustine Tang. I've been a driver for 5 years. After my father passed away from suddenly and left me with the New York Taxi medallion and also a $500,000 loan.
So before the pandemic, you had to work extremely long hours just to find enough customers in order to pay off the mortgage, the loan on the medallion. Then the pandemic hits, and suddenly all your customers are gone, right? Nobody in Midtown Manhattan, nobody coming and going from the airports, no one at Broadway shows, no one coming and going from restaurants at night. What did that do to you?
I mean, it was eerie to see the city like this, obviously, because we've been driving the city for a long time. For us, we just felt like we had to stay home during that time when the pandemic hit. It's the safest way because we didn't know anything about what was going to happen, but we didn't know where our next income was going to come from. We relied on unemployment, but we are independent contractors, so we only have a maximum of $182 a week. If it wasn't for the PUA, which is the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program that was from federally was given to us, we wouldn't be able to survive. Luckily, right now the city is coming back alive a little more, but there's no way we could still make our mortgage payments.
So for the better part of a year, you literally had no industry. There was no business at all for you. You were on unemployment, and by the grace of some federal assistance, you were able to at least survive in one of the most expensive cities in the world. You're saying it's coming back now a little bit. What's the landscape like out there now for yellow taxis?
It's still bare. There's a lot of people still working from home. Broadway shows aren't going to come back anytime soon. There's a lot of things that we took for granted before the pandemic, and then when stuff like this happened, it's just, a lot of people just didn't have to move anywhere anymore.
This is a very, very resilient industry. Taxi garages, you could find taxi garages that have been open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year for decades. My name is Michael Wallows, and for 21 years, I've been a consultant to and spokesperson for the Metropolitan Taxicab Board of Trade, which is the largest taxi trade association in the United States and the oldest, representing over 5,500 yellow medallion taxicabs that are run by taxi fleets or taxi garages located throughout New York City.
Taxi garages in New York, they've been part of the landscape here for decades, right?
Taxi garages have been a fixture of New York City at least to the 1930s, which is when they formed something called the Haas Act, which created the medallion system. But I suspect that there were garages around before then. It was just a less regulated environment. But since 1937, I believe, there's been a highly regulated yellow taxi environment, and that's included taxi garages that lease taxis to drivers, and also included in the landscape are driver owners, and there's all kinds of arrangements out there. But the taxi fleet, the taxi garage that a lot of people associate with the show taxi, for example, those have been a fixture for decades.
You know, when I talk to restaurant owners, when I talk to musicians, you know, they've all had a very hard time during the pandemic shutdown. And yet they have some optimism. The restaurant owners feel this is an opportunity to rebuild their industry in a much more fair and equitable way. Musicians feel that when there is the ability for them to play live before big audiences again on a regular basis, that people are going to want to come out and that they'll bounce back. Is there an equivalent to that optimism amongst drivers and garage owners? Do they see a new landscape in New York City that's going to be a positive one for them?
Yeah, some do. Some do. I think there's a certain, hardiness about people in this industry. It's not an easy industry to be in. It's gritty, which I think your show would appreciate. It's tough, and those are the kind of folks that are working in this industry. They're not looking to go to an office every day. They're doing something else, and you'll find that there are a lot of taxi drivers who just love what they do. There are taxi garage operators and mechanics, and I mean that's a whole industry that doesn't get a lot of attention, but that you're talking about thousands of people that work on the back end. They love what they do, and some are quite optimistic. They see a changing landscape, but they also see that, you're still going to need vehicles to take people from point A to point B in a safe and affordable way. Yes, of course, people are using apps and other ways to summon those vehicles, and it's hard to compete with that. That being said, there's a hope that New Yorkers and resilient New Yorkers will continue to appreciate what a yellow taxi provides them. And that's an iconic ride. It's a certain type of experience. And it's something that, like many things about New York, there is optimism that that's not going to go away so quickly. There's staying power with yellow taxis. They have to adapt. They have adapted. As they were adapting, they got hit with this enormous blow of the pandemic. But, I think that there's a lot of pain out there for sure, but there is, just like any New Yorker who's been around for a little while, there is stubborn optimism that, the iconic taxi is going to be preserved. It's going to get better. The industry may change. It may shrink a bit. There may be, different aspects to it, but it's not going to go anywhere. And I think that gives a lot of people hope during these times. People want to see the taxi cab succeed, and I think that's a pretty powerful thing.
I'm Richard Wissack. I'm the vice president of a yellow taxi cab fleet named 55 Stan, and I'm speaking from the taxi garage in the yard in Long Island City, Queens.
How long have you had this business?
This cab company has been around for more than 50 years. So it started with my grandfather and then my father, and then around 35 years ago I came in full-time to the yellow taxi cab business. And so I've been around it for quite a while and, experienced all the ups and downs throughout. And yes, the yellow cab is an iconic New York symbol, but we've gone through, we have all four seasons here. So when it snows hard, the yellow cabs are out. We're kind of like the postal service. In the rain, the sleet, the heat, the freezing temperatures, the cars are always rolling. Through previous economic crises and certainly different administrations, and of course through 9/11, and now we're faced with this pandemic, which is unlike anything we've ever seen before, and much like the rest of the world.
Tell me what the impact was on your business when everybody essentially disappeared from the streets of New York and you had to shut down. What was that like for you?
Oh, it was and it is a very sad situation. You know, in all the years we've been here, it's certainly never gone on this long or close to this long. So it's still a feeling, and I'm sitting here in the yard. It's still uncomfortable and hard to believe that we're not operating.
So where do things stand for you and your business right now?
The way, my plan, I mean, at this point, after some long, hard thought on it, at this time, there is not enough, there's not enough money on the street for it to be profitable for me, this operator. Other operators are working, and, I want them to do well because I want to come back. But at this point, the charges, what they can charge the driver to take the taxi out and look for fares in Manhattan or the 5 boroughs really, doesn't cover our costs. And so the operators that have been, that haven't stopped, it's got to be very difficult economically for them. But as we start to head back, to a more quote-unquote normal, the drivers themselves are starting to make the same amount of money that they did pre-pandemic. They're not there yet, but it's heading in the right direction. And that's only because the operators have kept the price half of what it was pre-pandemic.
To take out a taxi.
That's correct. If there was a charge in January of 2020, that charge is 50% now, is what the operators are charging the drivers.
And just so our listeners understand, when you operate a fleet, you own the cars, licensed drivers come to you, and essentially, to put it simply, they rent the car from you to go out and drive.
The operator owns the vehicle, we pay the insurance, we pay the workers' compensation, we pay for the parts. We pay to pass the car at inspection. We have a 24/7 staff. We take the phone call if there's a problem with the car at all hours of the day and night. Whatever the issue is, whether it be an accident, police activity, we're the operator is on the hook.
When I talk to people for New York Gritty, across different economic sectors in New York, whether it's restaurant owners, musicians, people on Broadway, healthcare workers, everyone sees this as an opportunity to reinvent their sectors and to make them better, to make New York City a better place. They see opportunity now. How does that look in the taxi industry? What shape does that take for you?
Well, in terms of going forward, with this with this new type of New York, or what it's going to look like going forward, we're the only people that can legally accept street hails. And we're going to have more. I think we're going to have more of a presence with the app-based ride, to have more of a significant impact on that. I think we're going to need the next administration's help along the way with that.
So put your industry on equal footing with Uber, with Lyft, with those rideshare apps.
Yeah, because give the people what they want, and I understand that. Having been here for so long, I can tell you sincerely that a high percentage of these drivers are hardworking, honest people, and they, I believe, add value to the city. And having a yellow cab operation that employs cashiers, dispatchers, office workers, mechanics, body men, is a very good thing for the city. And when you have ride-sharing companies that offer none of that type of employment and none of that really color, I think the city would lose something if they don't help support the industry going forward, help it in a more substantial way.
The drivers are drowning in debt. they owe $500,000 on average on medallion loans, where the market value of the medallion is closer to $75 to $100,000, meaning that's how much you can make, potentially in order to pay off your loan. Since COVID, it feels nearly impossible to, make these payments.
That's Bhairavi Desai from the New York Taxi Workers Alliance.
So we have a proposal. We have been calling for the city of New York to act as a backstop on these loans, meaning that the city would say to medallion lenders, the banks and credit unions, that if they agree to lower the debt to $125,000, then the city will act as a guarantor. So if the owner is delinquent on a loan and the bank or credit union repossesses the medallion, the city would come in and place a minimum bid on whatever is left on the $125,000 loan. And if nobody bids higher than that, then the city would purchase the medallion, and then they would be able to turn around and resell that medallion. So we believe the net cost of this plan for the city at the worst of conditions would be about $75 million over 20 years. The city comptroller has signed off on it. He has said it's fiscally sound. The state attorney general has, said that it's something that the city should do. The mayor has continued to say that he wants to find a solution, but he's waiting for federal money on the overall budget crisis of the city. Well, just last week, Senator Schumer issued a statement in support of us, saying that he supports the Taxi Workers Alliance's fight for debt forgiveness and believes that the city should do everything it can to make it happen.
It's going to be 4% interest for 20 years, and the monthly payment will be $757. And this is sounds much better than my my monthly payment of $3,500.
That's Val George, the Bulgarian immigrant who bought his taxi medallion many years ago, sold on the claim that it would be his ticket to the American dream.
You could breathe again if you had that.
You can live. You can have hopes, and you can have some optimism, and it's not only the driver owners. You have to think that around them there are another, at least every driver owner have at least 3 to 5, maybe more people around him that depend on him.
Right.
Kids, elderly parents, wife, etc. So we came up with this plan, and this plan actually was approved by the Attorney General of New York State, by the Comptroller, by AOC in the Congress, and by lately, last few weeks, by Senator Schumer.
So the majority leader in the Senate has even endorsed this.
Exactly.
That must give you hope.
Hope. That is like the most, the best news we ever heard for the last few years. The Senate majority leader, Schumer, is on our side. And this is extremely helpful and good also for the city, for the driver owners, and for the financial institutions, because they will get their money, $125,000 for sure, plus interest.
You're confident that the yellow taxi is not going to fail in New York City, that the yellow taxis will forever be a feature of the streetscape of New York?
This is the hope. What are the choices? You need to be optimistic. I always say yellow cabs are the most hated and the most loved entity in New York City, because as you know, if you need somebody to drive you to the theater or to the doctor, you need a taxi, and if you see the taxi, like your eyes become like you're the most happy person. I remember people fighting behind me to get in the cab. I remember that moment.
And then there are the moments when other drivers are stuck in traffic and
That's right.
they hate the taxi. They take it out on you.
Right, like yellow cab created traffic and slow business and everything.
But here we are. The yellow taxis are still passing us on Flatbush Avenue, and you say you say they'll always be here.
That's the hope. If you think what are the things that people think when they think about New York City? I've been here for 30 years, and always when you think about New York, what do you think of? First thing, Statue of Liberty, then of course Empire State Building, and the third place is yellow taxi industry, yellow cab. And that's what I was thinking. They're competing with who? Maybe with the Chrysler Building and Broadway, but definitely third, fourth, fifth place around there.
Clearly, there are a lot of people fighting to maintain the yellow taxi as a fixture on the streets of New York. While the industry is facing an enormous challenge in this crisis, they see opportunity. When the U.S. Senate passed the $1.9 trillion COVID relief package, it guaranteed that a lot of dollars would be flowing New York's way. Taxi drivers, medallion owners, and fleet operators hoped that it would be the final piece of the puzzle needed to push City Hall to finally adopt their debt restructuring plan. The yellow taxi industry is just one of many sectors adapting to a post-pandemic future here. In the next episode of New York Gritty,
in this campus, we actually, counting the patients in Central Park, had 770 patients at the peak.
We'll talk with the people who are still on the front lines in the war against the pandemic and explore the long-lasting impact on the city's healthcare systems. Subscribe to New York Gritty on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and other podcast platforms. Rate and review us as well. Check out the website for more on the city's recovery from the pandemic, nygritty.com. And send me an email if you have a story about how you're getting by during this tough time. steve@nygritty.com. Follow New York Gritty on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter for details on upcoming episodes and more information about the impact of the pandemic here. I'm Steve Kastenbaum. Thanks for listening.